teaching you this summer. And, as plans is, I usually teach all of the second year curriculum, so probably have me for the next year and a half as it works out. I think all three of you are coming from you had Mr. G last semester doing C sharp, correct? Is that right? Yeah. Okay, so you guys kind of learned some C sharp. We'll be doing some intro to web development sort of technologies, web design type stuff this semester. Next semester, we'll be doing more web development, adding in databases and doing what we call full stack web development. But here we'll just be doing the front end part, right? So we kind of think about, you have the front end that people see, and you have the back end that's all the code that people doesn't see. So this semester we'll be focusing on the stuff in the front that you see, and next semester we'll kind of do both. So that's kind of where we sit as far as that goes. Okay, see if I can get in here. There we go. So a little bit of my background. I graduated with the BS, Bachelor of Science, Computer Science in fall 2010 at UMKC. So that's kind of my background there with bachelor's degree. Got that in 2010. I worked as a software developer from 2011 to 2017 here in the St. Louis area at two different companies. One I was doing radiation therapy planning software. You kind of do cancer treatment is kind of the usual place where that comes in. You shoot people with radiation, and they use something called a linear accelerator. And so you have to plan how you're going to deliver that treatment, how you're going to deliver that dosage. So that was one of the things that I worked on. The next company that I worked with was a company called Biomedical Systems, which has been bought out recently by another company. I forget their name. But they did what we call electronic patient reporting outcomes. So what that means is that patients, subjects, is what we would call them, would go home with an Android device, actually, where they would take surveys on a daily basis based on as they're participating in a drug trial. So, here's the kind of symptoms, here's how I feel every day, and building that out, making those custom questionnaires for every different trial, every different, what we call it, protocol, and trying to aggregate that data, get that data back to our servers, and then pull that together, do a lot of reporting that we could then give to the drug companies, kind of thing. So that's kind of where my background is. That first company was largely in C++, with a combination of some C that was in the code as well as some C sharp. So, my kind of spread around there was a lot of different languages, a lot of different technologies. With electronic patient reported outcomes, I was doing Android development, so that meant Java, but I was also doing web development and actually front end, desktop development, both of those, which involved using C sharp. So, living in two different worlds and that kind of thing. I've started teaching fall 2017 is when I got into there. So this is, I think, my fourth year doing this. Obviously, last year has been very different with everything moving online. Those are kind of tools we've been trying to get us in more of a place where we can function online, because there's a lot of value in that in our industry, but it's been doing a lot more of that last year, obviously. So if you're curious about all the technologies that I've messed with and languages that I know, there's a very, that's not the whole list, but you can see a lot of things there that I've touched. And I think if you ask a lot of professional developers what technologies they'll know, you'll get a similar picture, where you kind of go from thing to thing to thing as you're building projects. And that's one thing to keep in mind. This semester, we're going to be going over 3 different languages. Which may be a little bit of a jump from the one language that you learned last semester. But the thing you have to kind of recognize when we're dealing with web development, we're commonly juggling like 5 different languages in one program. Like, that's the norm. So you do have to get a little bit good about understanding where all these languages and technologies fit together, because you're not going to be using just one thing. That's kind of not the modern world. So there's frameworks, there's libraries, there's different languages that are good at different things. You have to kind of know how to get them to work together. So if you want to know about any of the things on that list, absolutely ask me. I've got a lot of background there. And it also means that as I teach things through this years, oftentimes I make callback of like this is like this language, because you kind of have to keep in your head, oh, these languages are similar in this way and they're different than this way, so you can juggle those things. As far as my kind of other background stuff, I was born in Indiana, lived there until 1990, lived in Zurich, Switzerland, um, roughly 7 years. I speak ein bisschen Deutsch. My German is not as good as it used to be, but I did learn a lot of German as I was living there. From there, we moved to Kansas City, lived there until 2011 when I graduated and got a job out here. I started actually programming at 16 with some C++, some Java, some Swing in there, some PHP, learning all kinds of things, mostly because I wanted to make games, right? So that's kind of where my intro to the industry was.
So is that where your experience with like Unity came from?
That's where I got into this later, actually. I didn't start. Unity is a relatively new
Well, I know
thing
they,
on
they
the.
use it for like there's a game,
Yeah.
like virtual reality. They use it
So
for,
Unity's amazing, and I use it today. It's not where I started because it wasn't a thing when I started coding. So I think that I started coding. When did I start getting into Unity? Um, 2016, 2015, I think is my first step to Unity. But before that, I was doing my own sort of game dev stuff. I think the first engine I worked with was something called Genesis 3D, which was later bought, and it's now available out there as something called Jet 3D. So that was kind of my foray into there with C++. But yeah, I have some projects that I've had on my side. If you look at my portfolio, you'll see a long list of game projects all in Unity. So that's where that comes, and obviously that's C#.
Okay, I think you have MIPS up there. So like, I know that's like an assembly language, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I was just wondering that's more of like a niche thing nowadays, right?
It is more of a niche thing, yeah. So MIPS is one of the things I actually needed to learn in college. That's one of the classes. Hey, huh? Yeah, you're in the right place. Just grab a seat. Yeah. Yeah, awesome. I will. We're already started, so I'll get in touch with you after we're done with lecture. Cool. So yeah. So where were we? You were asking about Unity. You were asking about.
Oh, I was asking about MIPS.
Oh, MIPS. Right. So that was one of the things I had to learn in college because you know assembly language is one of those required things that you have to take for a normal for most CS degrees, and part of that just comes down to understanding the hardware underneath. So MIPS is a what we call RISC, reduced instruction set computer, which actually has a lot in common with all of your Android phones that you have on the market, because all your Android phones have an ARM chip in them, and there's a lot of similarities between ARM and MIPS. So that's one of those things.
So I guess what I was getting at is that I understand in this program we're
Yeah.
kind of just getting like kind of like an overview
Yeah.
of like the field, but like in your opinion, how important is it to like learn like the lower level stuff? Like,
Not at all. Not at all. So here's the thing to kind of understand. So where the industry has changed over the years, and so where I came in, right? So I started programming, and the CS program I went through, did not cover web development, did not cover computer science. I mean, not computer science. I mean databases, like SQL. We talked a little bit about database, but we didn't do any SQL. and things like that. Smartphones, like the iPhone was just being released while I was in college, kind of thing. Android wasn't a thing yet, so things have shifted, and it used to be, there's some value in terms of if you're thinking about performance of understanding everything that's below. But the reality of today is that performance is not as important as it was I was taking when I was going to college, or as it was to the people that were teaching me, right? The people who were teaching me, it was really, really important in their day to get things to go fast, right? That was the one of the most important things. It's not the most important thing today. I will tell you that performance is not the most important thing. There are a lot of more things that are more important. Does it matter? Yes. But what you'll find is that 10 to 30% of your code is the code that you need to go fast. The rest of it doesn't matter at all. So it's actually, those kind of things have shifted. And in that 10 to 30% of code that you need to go fast, well, that's where you do have to understand some of those underlying architectures kind of things. Also, if you want to go into things like working with GPUs, then you really, really need to understand those underlying things. But the way that things are going, right? You're continuously building, and you're building on top of all the things that came before, right? So I kind of like to say, you kind of at this point you're standing on the shoulders of giants. There's a lot of stuff under here that's already been done. Honestly, you don't need to do, and you don't need to be a master of, because you're up here, and there's a lot of stuff down here, and this is where you're going to be building your applications. And the reality is, in your lifetime, you're going to see it go up another step, right? So it's pretty far removed from the hardware today, and it's going to be farther removed in just 5 years' time. So you probably don't need to understand assembly, right? Is it something out there that's interesting? Yeah, and you see the one right next to it, x86. That's something I learned for fun because I was taking my OS course and that. And I'm like, oh, I kind of would like to try and build an operating system. Well, you need to understand some x86 assembly to do that on like a Windows machine, right? So, there's a lot of things in there, you pick up just because you're interested, you want to do this, and that's a good thing, right? So those are things that, you should do. You're going to learn something for every new technology and language that you learn. And so that's part of why I bring that up. So anyway, coming back here, yeah. So game dev, that's kind of where I started at about 16. I got my associates in computer science, also in Kansas City at Metropolitan Community College. I got my bachelor's of science, as I mentioned, at UMKC. I also got a minor in math. I was pursuing a major and decided not to because there was too much general education to finish that. But I might be a bit of a math nerd. I have taken senior level math courses. So that's one of my things. Yeah.
I guess it obviously depends on the job. How important is like higher level mathematics?
Not that important. I came in, when I was doing my education, I thought that was going to be the very valuable thing, right? I thought that math was going to be the thing that I would use, and I would use all this stuff. And the reality of it, when I got into industry, I have all this math knowledge, but I think that I don't really use, I'd say that in industry, you really don't use much above algebra, like basic algebra. Like that's the level where you need to be for most things.
So would it just be more of like the skill of problem solving that helps you?
It can be. I think there's a lot of other ways to learn problem solving better than taking a lot of advanced calculus. That being said, there are portions of the industry that do need that, right? And so if I was in those spaces, then I would need that. For instance, the game dev that I do on the side, I do need more math. I do actually use a lot more math in game development than I do in traditional like web development type stuff. So algebra is kind of the end point of where you need to be for most web development types of front end or back end. But for game development, well, obviously you have to understand how 3D works and 3D math. And even if you're building 2D, we still use 3D math to do the 2D game, which might seem weird, but it works. So there are some things you have to kind of basically understand with vectors and things like that. If you want to get into machine learning, then that's a space where you're going to need more math. And basically what I would say is if you have an interest in going into the more math heavy things, you actually do need to get a master's or a doctorate. Because you're not going to get into those jobs that need a lot of math without a master's or a doctorate. That is a base need, and that also means doing some research in some of the theoretical areas. So for the common person, for most things, as long as you're not doing simulations in 3D, those kind of things, which is a small portion of the industry, you don't need most of those things. Cool. So yes, the problem solving is the thing I continuously hear people argue about, and I use some of that. I mean, I had to take a class specifically on sets and proofs, and so proofs is something that I've had at least 3 semesters worth of training on. I do very little of that. I don't even apply most of that honestly to my programming. So I think that's a little bit overemphasized. Suffice to say, but there are some things that are useful. It's just the reality is that a lot of people end up in a space where they're not going to use a lot of those things. So in 2011, I moved here, and so I've been here in St. Louis since then. Got married at 2019, just recently, so yay, that's been great. So that's a little bit about me, so you just kind of know where my background is. As far as things I'm interested in, and I think I left one thing off of there, which I should have put on there, is one of the things that I'm interested in is smart home stuff. I actually have a few smart home devices I use at home, and code that I've written against my house to control lights and things like that. So those are things that are really cool if you ever want to ask me about how some of that works. Concurrency, parallel processing is something that's been kind of a key interest of mine. How do you do things in parallel? And I took a course in CUDA, and I've had some interest in how do you do stuff on graphics cards, because there's some really amazing performance you can get if you utilize that portion of the hardware. If you think about our processors, I'm sure you've heard this term cores, right? So our average processor today actually has around 8 or 16 cores, which is a pretty big thing. When I was learning programming, we just had one, right? So we had to kind of fake this multi-core, multi-processing thing by doing things, interleaving things on that one core, which still happens. But when you look at that, so you got 8 or 16 cores on a CPU, you've got 1,000, 2,000 cores easily on a graphics processing unit. So you can do so much in parallel for problems that really is a good fit for. Which again is kind of a narrow space. It's things like scientific computing and modeling and games. So you see some of those things. Data modeling, when we talk about databases, that's one of the things I've taken interest in. Obviously, I talk about my game development. UX is something I've kind of starting to pick a few things up, because that's been a growing trend in the industry. And if you're going to research something, UX is a great place to go find more out. That will absolutely apply to wherever you end up. CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous deployment, process of getting things. Hey, I committed a change, and then immediately get it tested, get it into the production. So those are things. Marvel Comics, Marvel MCU. I'm a big Marvel fan. And things I do on the side: web development, game development. I'm a PC gamer. I haven't had too much time to do that since getting married. Things have been otherwise occupied. So we, with the limited number of things to do this year, and especially because both my wife and I like to do it, we've been doing a lot of antiquing. That's kind of our main pastime. I've been collecting action figures as of late, building up a kind of a wall and a few shelves in my office, and obviously following all the Marvel series and things that are coming out.
Like, you can get like 3D printers where you can like make like the different masks and stuff.
I have not gotten that far into 3D printing. I have a little cheap one,
Okay.
and I've had very little luck doing anything with that one. They're cool. I've dabbled with it. It's a really nice thing. It's a lot to get into a really nice one to be able to do it. So yeah, I know that people have done some really nice like helmets, like Iron Man helmets and things like that with 3D printers, and there's some definite cool stuff that you can do there.
I like how everybody just
But
kind of throws it up on the internet so you can
yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. It's pretty cool. I was able to pull down. You can pull down a lot of models and just say, "Oh, I'm just going to print this." And that's you can if you're interested in 3D modeling, which I've done a little bit of 3D modeling yourself, you can make a plan yourself. But it's nice to be able to pull things down. So anyway, that's a little bit of my background. If you do want to read more about some of my projects and things that I've done, that's the link to my portfolio. You can see all the games and stuff that I've worked on, and a lot of those have videos to go with them if you have any idea, if you have any curiosity of what mine is. And I was thinking I just had a typo there. So that's enough about me. So you have a little bit of background of what I'm about, what I do as my hobbies. I want you guys to introduce yourself. So let's start, and we'll come around the room, do it one by one. So start with you. Questions on the board.
Hi, my name's Cody. I'm basically here because I wanted to change careers. I worked in aerospace out of high school. I had a company that sent me for like machining and GD&T work, stuff like that. And then I worked in a place up in Denver, and then I worked at a place in O'Fallon, where I just kind of decided I didn't really like what I was doing. What I like about this program is I really like to find a job that I'm really passionate about. Like one thing I think would be cool out of this, one once I graduate would be to work in like the virtual reality space and do something with that. I just find that really fascinating.
I will say you need a lot more math to do
Yeah.
VR. Just a heads up.
I guess it's also kind of like the dream project would be to make something that's virtual reality someday. Current hobbies, I ride motorcycles, play computer games, and I take care, I guess, my two children. It's kind of a full-time hobby slash job. So,
Hey guys, my name's Brandon. I'm here because we're really I'm ready to make a change. I'm 27 and I've been working in food service my whole life, and I'm just done with it. And I've always taken an interest in computers and technology and stuff. So honestly, I'm kind of mad I didn't do this earlier, but here I am, and I'm happy. And what I want to get out of the program is honestly I want a job, but more importantly, I guess I just want a solid foundation to build from, and then from there, I guess just see what I really take an interest to within the field. As far as my dream project, I'm not really sure. Like I think the VR is very interesting, but for me, I think the main thing that sparked my interest within this was I don't know if anyone remembers the PSP. So I had one of those when I was a teenager, and I ended up learning how to like mod it or hack it, and like just put unsigned code on it and stuff like that when I was young. And I don't know, just kind of just making devices do things that they weren't intentionally meant to do is very interesting to me. Like video game systems, TVs, whatever. I just think it's really cool making things do things they weren't intended to do.
Yeah. And to your original question there, like if that's the place you want to get into, actually you should learn assembly. If you have any interested in hacking into consoles or making games for some of the older consoles, say the N64, the Game Boys, the Nintendos. Like you actually do need to know some assembly to do those kind of things.
That's why I mentioned the MIPS,
You know.
because I think the PSP uses MIPS. So like,
Okay.
I was kind
Yeah.
of looking at some of that stuff a
Yeah.
long time ago. Like,
Yeah.
you know, I didn't really understand it, but I was making some stuff work. I wasn't
Yeah.
proud, but I was doing it. But,
Yeah.
my current hobby now, I really don't do much. I work, I go to school, play some video games. That's really pretty much it for me. Hang out with my cat. That's about it. Pretty fun.
Meow.
My name is Don, and I'm here I'm here to inform of my interest in programming. As far as what I want to get out of this program, I say I say it I say the skills the skill level to freely create in front of my own app and website as a discovery. But I don't think I have a specific dream project. I just want I just want to make things for people really.
Mhm.
And my current hobby is learning how to play fighting games. So so far so far I made some progress in Street Fighter. So Blade Blue, I haven't won a single match in Blade Blue at all.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I ask about, dream projects is because first of all, it's a good way to guide you towards. That's a good thing to figure out and kind of guide you towards applying and learning more. If you have a pet project to work on, that will push you more to learn beyond what's just taught here. And the other reason is that I have people do final projects in second year, and so you're going to have an opportunity to kind of have some flexibility on different projects you want to pick. There are some bounds around that. There are some guardrails about like you can pick from A, B, C, or D, but it's good to have some kind of understanding of what things are you interested in, because those are good things to spin off as a hobby project, right?
My name is Michael. I guess I'm kind of here to like acquire the needed skills that I can use to build off of whatever I want to do in the future, whether getting a job right out of here, or like starting a company, doing something like that.
Mhm.
And like what I want to get out of it, kind of the same thing. Acquire those certain skills that I need. Uh, and I don't really have like a dream project, but I had a buddy, and he doesn't know anything about coding, but I kind of knew about it. And he wanted me to build like an e-commerce website, so I went into it. Didn't really have an understanding of everything that needs to go into that, so I couldn't quite complete it. But that's kind of what I want to get out of this as well. And my current hobbies, I play golf quite a bit, and then video games and stuff like that, like Rocket League, is kind of what I'm enjoying now.
Cool.
My name is David. Why am I here? I guess I've been in the food service industry for like 10 years, and I'm kind of sick of it too. So I'm just trying to get out of that industry. What I want to get out of the program is, I guess, just the fundamental knowledge of some of the, just the basic knowledge of computer programming, and see where my interests lie and stuff. Dream projects. I'm really into music. I play piano and guitar. Maybe some kind of project where I can implement my computer skills with my music skills would be something that would be really cool to me.
Yeah, there's some really cool stuff out there. There's a language actually that I've seen, and I haven't used it personally, but they've actually done like coding performance. So there's this kind of language that's you kind of write it and it makes sounds, it makes music, And so there's these performance of people actually writing code on stage and changing the program as it goes and changing it's really cool actually. So there's some actual really cool like stage performance coding stuff that is absolutely amazing, even if you don't know code, right? So yeah, that is absolutely out there.
And then current hobbies, I like fishing, hiking, video games, cooking, some stuff I enjoy. So.
Awesome.
Yep.
Okay. So now you know a little bit about me, you know a little bit about your classmates. So hi. As you can kind of see, we'll be doing seated classes this semester. We're meeting 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday, just as a reminder. These are a little bit longer sessions as well. Traditionally, we have 4-hour classes. This is actually a 6-hour class per day. We're going to start at 8, we're going to end at 2:25. So that being said, obviously we'll have a lunch break in the middle. We'll kind of talk about that when we get to some of the more things. As far as what we're going to be covering this semester, just a quick summary. There are some more things here, like this is not the whole list. But the main things you're going to focus on is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Those are the 3 things we're going to cover this semester. So the HTML we use to define what we call the structure of the web, of our pages. That is the underlying foundation that everything builds off on top of. Of the 3 languages up here, this is the one you need to know the least about, actually, though. Because you really don't need a lot of HTML skills to be confident. But it is the foundation, and it's where we'll start. Next up is CSS, and that's for styling, right? So this defines kind of the structure of the content. That makes it look good. Without CSS, you have boring websites nobody wants to use. So we use CSS, which is a completely separate language, to make it look pretty. Change colors, change fonts, do our layouts, all those kind of things. So we'll be spending a good amount of time here. And actually, this course is the only time where we'll spend a lot of time on CSS. We will use CSS in 3rd semester, but I won't give any lectures on CSS. Right? I will assume in 3rd semester that you know CSS and leave it at that, or that you can find the things online that you don't know. So that is a big pillar in the semester, is learning CSS. I will say that CSS has gradually changed in a lot of ways over the years. So a lot of things that we needed to know in the 90s and you needed to know to build websites, you don't necessarily need to know today. And one of the things that's changed that is something called Flexbox. So we'll be spending a good amount of time focusing on Flexbox when we get to it, but we're going to be skimming through some of the earlier chapters because some of that older CSS isn't relevant anymore. We had some old ways that we did layouts. We don't really do it that way anymore. So we'll talk about a little bit of that, but I'm going to keep that short. Which one of the things that means there's some chapters in there, 4 through 6, we're going to go through pretty quickly compared to some of the other chapters. So those are things to keep in mind. There's a lot of stuff to know here, but there's also a lot of stuff that has changed. This is probably the biggest point where your textbook is wrong, is when it comes to CSS. And the 3rd part we'll be learning is interactivity, is using JavaScript for interactivity. So if you just have HTML and CSS, you're going to have a website that has information, it has text, it has images, but it doesn't actually do anything, right? So JavaScript is what allows us to make websites that actually do something, right? And a lot of that involves working with forms. If you had any sort of registration or login form, that's a form. There's some JavaScript behind it. If you've had anything where, hey, it's after the login screen, maybe Facebook, you're posting a new post, you're tweeting on Twitter, you're making comments, you're upvoting, you're downvoting, all of that stuff is JavaScript. So JavaScript is actually the really important thing there. And in fact, with our curriculum the way it is, 3rd semester, JavaScript. And we will be spending a ton of time on JavaScript in that 3rd semester. That is our dominant language in 3rd semester today. And And that is actually the dominant language for a lot of things in the industry right now, because it's actually gotten to, it used to be that it was not a very great language. It used to be there were a lot of issues with JavaScript, but it's gotten really amazingly well for doing all sorts of things today. So that's a great language to let's dive
When would
into.
you say JavaScript kind of like took off and become
Around 2010
okay, what would you like? Is there like something that was like accredited to that, or
was what?
was there something that like
Yes, exactly. It's something called Node. So Node is JavaScript was introduced by Mozilla, by Netscape, way back in the 90s, right? They were the first originators of this JavaScript thing, which, by the way, JavaScript has no similarity to Java. That was only used as a marketing ploy by the Mozilla team. So that kind of started a thing in the 90s. You know, we started getting JavaScript in the browsers, but we had this IE had its own version of JavaScript, and Netscape had its own version of JavaScript. So there were a lot of compatibility issues back in the day. Now it's been standardized by a body known as ECMA. So it's ECMA script. So there's kind of a standard, which has really helped in terms of the browser. But in 2010, somebody called Ryan Dahl created this thing called Node, which is a way to run JavaScript outside of the browser. And that opened it up to all other types of development beyond just web development. So that's what made the change, is Node, which is what we're going to focus on the third semester because it's such an amazing tool. So that's really what we're focusing on. You should have gotten 2 textbooks. So the first one you should have, and this is where we're going to start, is the HTML and CSS textbook. That's going to take us through this first 2 parts. In the interim, we're also going to talk about something called Bootstrap, which is a CSS framework. It makes it a lot easier to write your CSS, do your styling. That's not covered by either of the 2 textbooks, so we'll be using online resources for that. You should also have another textbook. And I don't have the current edition handy because we just upgraded. You should be getting the 4th edition of both of these books. But the second book that we'll be going through is this JavaScript and jQuery book. So we'll be taking about the first half of the semester. We'll be going through that first book. The second half of the semester, we'll be focusing on this book. Because of how things are and how things are moving with the industry, I'm going to try to move through this book as quick as I can because we need to focus more on the JavaScript side, if that makes sense. In a lot of ways, you're learning 3 languages. HTML, CSS, and JavaScript are all languages, but only one of those is a programming language. So JavaScript isn't considered a programming language. Neither HTML or CSS are actually programming languages because effectively you don't write code in them. The only one of those 3 that you write code in for loops and if statements and variables, that's JavaScript, right? So you need to know the other 2 parts. The JavaScript does hook into and communicate with both of those 2 things. You can manipulate the HTML, you can manipulate the CSS using JavaScript. So that's kind of why you have to learn in that order. So that's kind of the foundation. Have you guys had a chance to get your textbooks yet? I hope you have. If you haven't, the first 3 chapters are posted on Inside Ranken. So you can pull down those as scanned copies, but do recognize that we're going to be going fast. Get your book as quick as you can. Other thing to note in there, this is a big book. I just said we're going to cover 2 textbooks. Obviously, we're not going to go through this whole textbook. So as far as what we're actually going to cover in here, this textbook has 20 chapters, right? What we're actually going to cover is the first 9 of those. We're going to cover the first 9 of those chapters. We will talk about some stuff that is in chapter 13, for instance. Chapter 13 is around forms. So we will talk about that as we do our JavaScript stuff. But that's just for reference. We won't be going through either of those entire books because of timing. Okay. But this book does not cover JavaScript, hence why we have to go to the other book. So the IDE we will be using this semester is something called VS Code. Last semester you probably used Visual Studio. This is Visual Studio Code. It's not the same thing. Even though it sounds very similar, VS Code is a completely different IDE from Visual Studio. So if you would, you can go ahead and go to code.visualstudio.com and go ahead and get it downloaded and installed. So we can kind of get you started and rolling there. Do you have your laptop with you?
I don't have I have a Mac.
Okay.
I don't have it with me. It's like I can do it kind of like a machine here.
So that machine right there,
Which one?
the blue box right there. We need to get you set up on that then. So if you want to get situated so you can get in there, please do. But you get a laptop, you'll need a Mac, you'll need a Windows laptop, especially for second year. It's not be good enough for second year. Let's see, control please and get in there. I don't know what the, okay, I'll have to message Evan and find out what the password is. I'll ask him. Quick here. So I'll ask him, get it sorted out, or we'll get it sorted out today, get it sorted out next time. Okay, that's what I needed. Okay. Got it. Let's see if that works. So get the VS Code account. Yeah, I got it. If you got it pulled down, please pull it up and get it running. not going to do too much today with it, but just getting you set up.
I'm just like, is there a way to get on? Just get Wi-Fi?
Yeah, you can get on the regular Wi-Fi, but I would actually just hook into the
I don't think I have it.
just hook into this, and that will get you to a wired connection.
Perfect.
If you're on one of the hubs. Will you grab this code that's in yet? I don't know the password. We'll figure it out. Yes, there's a plugin you need to install. There's a plugin you need to install. It's called, if you look under extensions, look for something called, just erase all of that, and look for live server. Yeah. Live space server. Yeah, install that. And tomorrow we can talk about how to use that. But that's what we're going to use. Out of the box, it doesn't. Okay, so you're good. You can download that and get it installed. Did you get it downloaded?
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
Okay. All right. So you can install that when it gets pulled down. So that's the IDE that we will be using. Some people also refer to it as a text editor because it's actually pretty lightweight. It's not much heavier than, say, a Notepad++. But that's the thing we'll be using for all of our development this semester. The textbook, the IDE that it uses is Brackets. We will not be using that one. We'll be using VS Code. I mention this because it is a question on one of your quizzes coming up. So in Chapter 1 or Chapter 2, I forget which one, there will be a question about which IDE we're using. The correct answer is Visual Studio Code. Cool. So that's what I'll be using, and that's what my examples will be based on. Another thing to know for this semester, so we're going to operate in sort of what we call a flipped classroom methodology. So what that means is that rather than giving traditional lectures in class, my plan is to deliver most of that material out of class. So there's a bunch of recorded lectures and some additional complementary videos I will be giving you. They're all in a YouTube playlist, so you can watch through that. And that's actually everything recorded for our first textbooks. Everything for the HTML and CSS textbook is basically already there. So that's how we'll be doing lectures. We'll be doing those as recorded. They'll be out. I'm not planning to give a lot of live lectures. I will, however, be doing discussions. So what my expectation is you to watch the videos, read the textbook outside of class, and then we will discuss and talk about it and answer questions in class. And that way we can spend all of the time that we have together focusing on helping you understand the material, helping discuss it, helping alleviate things that are confusing, helping us actually do work and build things, rather than spending all of our time with me standing up here and telling you stuff which you could have just watched in a video format and gotten it at your own speed with the ability to play it however fast or slow you want. If you want to play it at 1.5 speed, absolutely go for it. I mean, I watch videos lately sometimes at that speed. It also gives you the option to pause it. Hey, I need to go back. I didn't understand that. I need to hear it again. You can just rewind the video. Or you need to get up and go to the bathroom. You just go do that. So that's kind of how we're going to operate this semester. So what that means is I'm going to ask you, and this is on the calendar, and there's going to be quizzes about this. I'm going to ask you to do the reading and the watching the videos out of class. You'll have a quiz that you'll take on that, and then we'll talk about it in class. Okay?
So the quizzes will be taken at home?
The quizzes you'll take at home. Yeah, so the quizzes are taken at home. They all have a due date of midnight. Okay, so they'll all be the day before we're actually going to cover the material. Does that make sense? So that's the due date of those kind of things. So for instance, you have the quizzes for chapters 1 and 2 are out there. They're due Sunday because we're going to talk about chapter 2. Actually, I think one of those is due. One of those is the chapter 1 is due tomorrow. The chapter 1 is due tomorrow. Chapter 2 is due on Sunday. So we're going to talk about. We'll talk a little bit about chapter 1 tomorrow, and then on Monday next week we'll talk about and discuss both chapters 1 and 2. Okay. So there's a lot of questions on there. Fair forewarning, a lot of those are essay questions, and part of that is just to get the discussion rolling. A lot of the questions that I'm asking there are not because I'm looking for the correct answer. I'm just looking to get the discussion started and get you start thinking on a few different things. So that's what those are about, right? It's not about getting the right answer in most cases, although obviously there are some multiple choice questions where there is a right answer. But a lot of those are just saying, hey, I want to see that you've thought about it and read the material. What have you gotten out of it, right? And so that's really what I'm looking for, is that you've done the reading, watched the videos, and you're starting to think about, what are the questions and how does this apply to what we're doing, right? So that's how the format's going to go. Any questions there? So that means you have some freedom about when you watch the lectures and things, but there is still some deadlines, still some guidelines around when you have to have it done by, right? So that's what that's about. Again, our focus is to push the information delivery. That's stuff you're going to do at home, whereas we're going to do the stuff where I can really help you in class, working on it and answering questions and sorting out and applying things. So a few tips for just general success. Always ask for help. I have students repeatedly who think they can do everything themselves. I will give you a big hint. You can't. And when you get in the industry, you won't, right? So it's really important to know when you are at a point where you are struggling and to ask for help at that point. That's not just a valuable skill here, that's a valuable skill in industry. Because there will always be people on your team who know things that you don't, especially as a new developer, right? Especially as a new developer, you're going to have people in your team, very likely, that have 3 to 5 years of experience. They will probably know how to solve the problem. So rather than you spending 4 hours and getting nowhere, right? Sometimes the right answer is just go ask somebody, right? So I'm here. I would absolutely love to hear questions from you. I can for sure say that the amount of questions and the types of questions that you ask directly predicts how well you're going to do in the industry, right? People that don't ask any questions, that are completely isolated, you're going to have a problem when you go to the industry, because you're going to have to work with people. You're not going to know the whole system. There's not going to be documentation for the thing you're building. There's going to be a lot of context and stupid questions that you have to ask. So, don't be afraid of, get in the habit of asking the stupid questions, because you're going to ask them when you get in the industry. Okay, so I'm here. Don't be afraid to ask those questions. Don't feel like you have to know everything. Don't feel like you have to be a lone wolf, right? I think a lot of people sometimes get into that mindset that they think, I need to do everything myself because I'm going to learn best that way. But the reality is there's a lot of things, there's a lot of roadblocks, there's a lot of gotchas in this industry that you don't know about, right? And so I've been programming for more than 10 years. I know some things that aren't in the textbook, right? And I know that there are places where the textbook is flat out wrong, right? So if you don't ask me about some of those things, you may not get that information. Okay? So absolutely ask for help. Also it's a good thing to work with your teammates, work with your classmates, but do be careful. Sometimes I see students work together and then 3 of the students come up with the same wrong answer because they all kind of agreed, okay, this was the way I want to do it, but I didn't teach it that way because it's the wrong way, right? So always check what you get with classmates, with other resources. Same thing, Stack Overflow, I'm sure you've probably seen it already, is a great resource for answering a lot of your questions, but there's also a lot of wrong material out there on Stack Overflow and things. So, I still use that. Professional developers use Stack Overflow, but the problem is you have to develop skills to know what is good information and what is bad information, how to kind of suss that out, right? And so that's one of those things where, if you're at a point where you feel like you need to look at Stack Overflow, that's a really good point to maybe ask your instructor because he probably knows something about it, right? So tips there. Again, make sure you're watching lectures and the videos that I'm adding with it. There's some additional videos I'm adding in that playlist that are beyond just what's in the chapter, partially just because they're really made videos and better than I can do, but they're also just quick summaries, right? So a lot of those videos are 30 minutes or less, and they do a really good job of packing a lot of information into that. And some of that is information that's not in your textbook, which you may need to actually do your labs, right? Sometimes I see people making the assumption that you can start on your work, start writing your code before you know the theory. But in reality, if you go that way, you're going to take a lot longer than if you just learn the theory and then do the code, right? If you just jump straight into it, whatever it is, whether it's this year, whether it's this semester or next semester, if you jump into it and say, I'm going to just code it without learning how to do at least a little bit of how to do it, you have a really hard time, right? So the lectures and the resources that I've provided are basically the shortest summary that's possible of the things that you need to know before you start, right? Yes, there's going to be initial things that you need to learn when you actually go to do it, but those things are there to get you ready for the first line of code that you write. Cool? So that's there. Read the textbook. I would also advise you to do that as well. Again, there's more information there. There's more information than I can put on my lectures. So that's a resource that you have available to you. I would also strongly advise you, even more than reading the textbook, read beyond the textbook, because again, textbooks get dated and things evolve, and all of the material you have in your textbook is really just an introduction, right? It's just the very, very basics. In reality, these technologies are constantly evolving. There's constantly new features, and you may need a deeper understanding of that particular thing that is in your textbook. So I would strongly advise you to consult resources. MDN is the Mozilla Developer Network. They have the best documentation on the stuff we're going to cover this semester. They have the absolute best documentation. So if you're finding something on Stack Overflow and Stack Overflow says do this, go look it up on MDN and find out how it actually works, right? Because then you'll actually have a better understanding of it, and you'll understand whether that answer is right or wrong, right? So MDN, you probably want to bookmark a bunch of pages in there because there's a bunch of things that's the best place to get authoritative answers on how things actually work. Medium is also a great place to look as well. There's a bunch of Medium articles that are just phenomenally written about anything web development related. So those two resources are really your best bet for correct and accurate information, even more so than, say, Stack Overflow. Cool? So I'd strongly ask you to consult those. There's another website out there called W3C Schools. they're okay. Most of their information is out of date. Just a fair forewarning. MDN is the updated version of W3C schools effectively, right? So a lot of the stuff that you see on W3C schools is almost a copy and paste from things on MDN, but 10 years older, right? So make sure that you're consulting, up-to-date resources. And also, as I mentioned, hobby projects are a great thing. Make sure that you're making projects to explore what you learned. So let's say you finish the labs or the homework early. What I'd ask you to do, put that time into building a hobby project, building another project. Because you have 2 projects that are due at the end of the semester, a client site project as well as a portfolio. And so that's a great time to spend those extra hours that you have available to you, as well as just, making another project. That will get you more experience than what the labs are going to cover, right? So you may need more practice than just doing the labs. So I'd strongly recommend thinking through, what is a project you want to build this semester, and having that as a side thing that you can do and that you can tie in with some of the projects. As I normally do, ask my students to make a project of their own design. That's a norm for me. So, that's usually something that I want people to start building their own projects so that you can dive deeper into things. So do be aware of that. There are some guardrails on, certain projects, like here's the requirements, but I try to give assignments every once in a while that are like, just build something that applies the skills, right? And so that can get you into a place where you have a chance to explore things deeper. But when you have those creative projects, let me stress, those are not opportunities to do the minimal amount of work, because then you won't be prepared for the test or the thing that comes next. If there's a lot of creative freedom on there, the reason is I expect you to actually do more than what I would expect if I've given you strict requirements, right? So the goal is to get to the point where you can show me that you understand those, not to just get the points, right? And so those are the kind of things to keep in mind. So let's talk a little bit about the stuff that's on the syllabus. All right, so let me go to log in inside Ranken. And I'm going to go into our course. Okay, so on the main page, you're going to find that there's a bunch of things available. And there's a bunch of links here for different things that you will need to have access to. Oh, I'm on the wrong course. Okay, so there's a bunch of links here for different things, including the link to get started with GitHub to create your repo, the playlist. This has all the videos, all those lectures that I was talking about. So this is where I'll be posting all that stuff, and you can go watch the lectures. Is through that playlist. I'll be adding things to it. This calendar is out there as well, so you can see that, and that will be constantly updated as we move through the semester. So check that on the regular to kind of see what's happening. A link to the Discord server if you aren't on that yet. I think most people already are, but that's a good way to get in touch with me when we're not in class, is to message me or to say something on there. And then I've also provided some links to different relevant tutorials. So for instance, I mentioned Mozilla Developer Network. Here's a bunch of articles, a bunch of tutorials related to the stuff that we're going to cover in this first textbook. So if that textbook isn't working for you, if you need some additional information, that's a good place to look. Cool. If you don't have the textbook yet, here's the first 3 chapters. So you can download those and read those through digitally should you need to. But again, I would stress getting the textbook as soon as you can. All right, so let's look here. So there's the slides, if you want to pull down the slides that we went through today, and the syllabus. So let's talk through the syllabus. So you already know this is AWD 1000, Web Development Technologies. We're meeting again Monday through Thursday. So we're meeting tomorrow, and then we'll see you back at Monday. We're not meeting on Fridays. Classes from 8:05 to 2:25. Tardies are back in effect, so that does mean that you need to be here at 8:05, exactly 8:05, and you need to stick around until exactly 2:25. If you're leaving early, you're either going to get marked tardy or absent, depending on how early or how late, or how late you show up or how early you leave. So those things are in effect. Our session, the summer session, is a little bit short, so we only have 54 sessions. In a normal regular semester, we would have 80. So just recognize that we're going to have to move through this at a quicker pace than what we would have to do in, say, the fall semester. Okay, because we're short a bunch of sessions. Mind you, they're 6 hours instead of 4 hours, but still, it's things that we have to move through. And we'll try to cover everything that you need, but there may be some things as far as HTML or JavaScript that maybe we can't touch because we're short a day or two. So just keep that in mind. We're going to be meeting here in grade G203. Here's all my contact information should you need to. I don't think I updated my office hours there. Yeah. So I will be, I'll be working on, we won't have class on Fridays. I will be working on Fridays, but I will be working on, like, I've got a bunch of curriculum updates I got to do for the fall. So that'll be the main thing I'm doing on Friday. But you will be able to contact me. I won't be doing too much office hours this semester because we're having 6 hours in person. So, usually we would have a 4-hour class in the afternoon, and I would be available for a 4-hour period before class, but because we're doing what we are, most of that, you'll just get in touch with me here or on Discord when we're out of class.
In the fall, we'll be moving that.
Yes, yeah. In the fall, your class will be from 12:35 to 4:25, if I remember right, the schedule. It'll be an afternoon class. And so then I will, then I'll have office hours in the morning. The textbooks, as I already mentioned, we have 2 textbooks from Murrock. We have an HTML and CSS textbook. We have a JavaScript and jQuery textbook. Make sure that you get the 4th edition of both of these textbooks. There are older editions available. They are significantly out of date. So there's been some major. This is actually the first time we're running with the 4th edition of the JavaScript textbook. That's brand new to us. I've only ever taught with the 3rd semester, the 3rd edition of it before, so we'll have to make updates for that as we go along. But there's been some really important things that they've changed from 4th edition to 3rd edition, which really means that you need to get that edition. This one was released in 2020, just last year. The HTML CSS textbook is a little bit older. It was released in 2018. So, some things have changed in the last 3 years, suffice to say. So general outcomes that we expect everybody to get out of this course. We want you to be able to write what we call standards compliant HTML5 and CSS3 to both structure and style your web pages. So we kind of talked about some of that already. But standards compliant mean you're following kind of the formal rules. There's a lot of ways to write HTML. There's a lot of ways to write CSS. But just because it works in the browser doesn't mean that it's correct. So that's kind of where this standards compliant comes in. We'll talk about CSS3, how to use that, position things around your website, especially talking about what we call responsive web design techniques, which is, okay, I want to make a website that both works on a smartphone, right, on this tiny tiny screen, but also works up on a larger screen, whether that be a 1080p or all the way up to 4K, right? You know, some people have 4K monitors. Those are actually surprisingly hard to support. It's actually really hard to get things working, regardless of what software you're building on a 4K monitor. Because you go from 1080p, which is, you know, this, to that many pixels on a 4K monitor, things tend to get really, really tiny. So you have to be careful with that regard. It used to be that we could specify things largely in pixels, and that worked fine until you get a 4K monitor, and a pixel is teensy, 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 teensy tiny. So you do have to kind of keep some of those things in mind. The high end as well as the low end are problems now, right? Because there's such a disparity between tiny little smartphone, 4K monitor, right? So we really have to be able to build websites that can adapt to that. And so one of the tools we'll be using there is Bootstrap. Bootstrap's a really great tool in building responsive websites and building them easily and quickly. We'll look at images, we'll look at lists, we'll briefly look at tables. We won't actually spend too much time on these. Tables, video, and audio are not as important for this semester and future semesters as other things. Same thing with animations. We'll be really focusing on web forms when we get to the JavaScript world and kind of doing event-driven programming like you saw in second semester. I think you guys were using Windows Forms. So you had like when you click on a button, then this happens, or if you change focus, then this happens. You can do all those kind of things with JavaScript. So that should be very familiar when we get in here. This should be very familiar with what you've done with Windows Forms last semester. Yeah, and so we'll talk a little bit about fundamental programming concepts, such as using variables in JavaScript, branching, like if statements and switch statements, and the various loops that are available in the JavaScript world as well. We'll also talk about how to manipulate the DOM using both JavaScript and jQuery. DOM is short for Document Object Model, and so basically it's a way to dynamically change the HTML of the web page, basically. Dynamically change what's happening with the web page. So we'll be working with that. General, we've got some policies that are specific to the IT department. One of those is that we don't want you to be streaming videos unless it's for class, right? So obviously I've given you a bunch of lectures. I'm not going to have a problem with you watching those lectures on YouTube. I'm also don't have a problem with watching programming videos in general on YouTube. What we just don't want you to be doing is sport channels or gaming, those kind of things while you're trying to work, right? So we want, you know, videos are okay as long as it's for class, and as long as it's class related and you're not disrupting, you know, the other people in the classroom, right? Because sometimes that can be distracting to see flashing lights and other things going on. No video games in class. That includes on your software, etc. You know, we really want you to be focused on that. Obviously, everybody has a cell phone at this point, but if you're going to answer a voice call, please take it out. You know, take it outside of the room, take it in the hallway, so you're not disrupting the other people in the class, etc. You can use earbuds. That's perfectly fine. I don't have a problem with you having headphones to watch videos or listen to music. We do ask that you don't use over-the-head earphones so that we can still get a hold of you to share information, get in touch with you. Some of the noise-canceling earphones are big enough that it's like, hello, hello, and so we can't get a hold of you because sometimes we have things to share. So we'd rather you just use earbuds or whatever, something that doesn't block all of the sound. That's it. As far as other IT rules, 5 absences is a automatic needs improvement. There's a lot of nuances to this. In reality, this is very unlikely to apply because there's also just changes with how we're doing work ethic in general. So that's been kind of one of our standards that if you're missing 5 absences, also that says 80-day semester, which this is not an 80-day semester, so again, this doesn't particularly apply here. As far as attire, there are a few special rules for the ID department. You do need to be wearing dress shoes, and yeah, so dress shoes and dress socks are an expectation. No tennis shoes, no athletic shoes. There it is. Business appropriate dress socks. So that just means, basically black socks is a given for standard industry stuff. Some designs are okay, just make sure it's something that's, business appropriate, professional kind of thing. No excessive jewelry and no hooded garments. That's a big thing. This is the rule that we tend to have the most problems with, is the hooded garments part. And that means, that applies immediately the second you step in the door, right? So if you're gonna wear a coat or a hoodie of some sort to stay warm, take that off before you step in the classroom, please. That's all I ask. Cool. All right, so let's talk about attendance. So students are expected to attend all scheduled course sessions. You're expected to arrive on time and remain for the duration of each course session. You're responsible for monitoring your attendance record on Inside Ranken. I'm not infallible. Sometimes I do make mistakes with your attendance. Sometimes I mark people absent when I shouldn't. Sometimes I accidentally mark people present when I shouldn't have. I try to keep that as accurate as I can, but sometimes, again, I do make mistakes. So, take a look at that. So in terms of one of the clauses that is new still, because we're still in this COVID-19 pandemic state, to prevent students from feeling pressured to attend seated classes in fear of exceeding the allowable number of absences during the pandemic, the procedure for enforcing the attendance policy for seated and face-to-face courses will be modified for the summer 2021, and the attendance policy as follows. And basically what that's trying to say is we don't want you to be here if you're sick. If you feel sick at all, stay home, please. It doesn't matter if you think it's COVID. It doesn't matter if you think it's a flu. It doesn't matter if you think it's a stomach bug. If you feel sick at home at all, just, take that symptom as a sign and stay home. And just let me know first thing. We'll figure out a way for you to do the necessary material online.
So is that still like the same protocol where like if anyone in the household is sick, they want you, like before it was like anyone in the household?
So for sure, the household is a much more tricky thing. For sure, if somebody in the household has a positive, right, for COVID-19, do not show up, period, right? If that's the case, you don't be here. Don't be here if somebody in your house has a positive test result. Even if they don't have a positive test result, if you have reason to believe that they might have it, you should also stay home, right? So if anybody in your household might have been exposed, whether or not whether the test result was negative or positive, you should stay home. You should still quarantine yourself for 2 weeks if that occurs, right? So if you're, let's say you have your spouse got exposed at work or might have been exposed at work, they got a notice from their employer, you should stay home. If your spouse or somebody else in your household has been told to self-quarantine, you should self-quarantine. Cool? So that's how I would apply that. So if you have anybody in your household that needs to quarantine for whatever reason, I would expect you to quarantine as well. Just let me know. We'll make arrangements. That's the other reason that I'm doing all my lectures recorded, right, and posting them online, so that if that should happen, there's no reason that you need to. You can just say, hey, here's the video here, right, and we can do discussion online I'll just open up the streaming on Discord so you can jump in and be involved in the conversation. So we have tools to arrange that. You're not going to be drastically behind if you need to miss a day here or a day there. Cool. So as far as rules for the other rules in here that are in place, so there's allowable number of absences, number of sessions that you're allowed to miss without being dropped from the class. Remember, this is 54 sessions, so it's a little bit of a smaller number. So the number that you're allowed to miss is 4, and that's by per the student handbook. So if you get to that 5th absence, I have to fill out paperwork to drop you from the class. It doesn't matter what the reason for those 4 absences were, I have to fill out that paperwork. Now, it is worth noting that there is an appeals process. So if that does happen, especially if that happens for medical reasons, if you have to miss 2 or 3 days because you're sick, keep records of that. I don't need that at the time, but you need to have records for that, because what we're going to do is if you hit 5, we'll submit all those records and say, here's what's up. 3 of these absences were for medical reasons, and they'll come back and say, oh, that's fine. We'll give you these absences have been appealed, and you can stay in class. Cool. So if you have any cases like that where you need to miss class for medical reasons, keep track of that documentation. Keep track of those doctor notes and whatnot, because we'll present those later should it become an issue. Okay. As I mentioned, tardies are back in effect. So this is probably not a policy that you've seen before because it's been not in use for the past year and a half. Our policy is 10 minutes or less of being late or leaving early or being absent during the middle of semester, middle session, whatever it is. 10 minutes or less of being absent is a tardy. So, that's down to the minute, right? So I need you to be here at 8:05 sharp, leave at 2:25 sharp. Anything less than that, arriving at 8:06 is a tardy, leaving at 2:24 is a tardy. And it's also worth noting that our attendance policy is in such a way that if you're packing up at 2:20, you're tardy. You can't pack up until 2:25, right? Because effectively, if you're packing up, you're not here for those 5 minutes, right? Right? You're basically not doing coursework. So that's one thing that we ask, right? Is don't pack up your stuff until 2:25, right? And so we want you to be engaged. We want you to be working on things. And again, if you get to a point where you finish the lab, let's talk about let's talk about a project that you can get started on and get you started on that, because that will still forward your learning process. There's a lot of ways to apply things. Okay. Just because I know honestly, a lot of labs in this course are pretty easy, and if you're fast, you can get through this a lot faster than the schedule I've set. Cool. So that's part of why I mentioned those things. Your tardies are a 2-for-1. They're basically half of an absence. So every two tardies counts as 1 absence. So that means if, for instance, you have 6 tardies, that's going to count as 3 absences, and that's counting towards those absences that are going to hit your work ethic as well as hit your potential getting dropped from the class. So that's what that is. Is that rule pretty strict? Yes, it's pretty strict. It's probably the strictest rule that I've seen. But it is what it is. So that's what we're going by, because that's kind of, I think, what's come out of industry is that, hey, they really want you to be here, right? And so there's a bunch of reasons behind that. But also in here, and I think I mentioned this already, students that have been placed on quarantine by the Dean of Academic Affairs, that is Shannon Brueggemann, or your local health department. you will be allowed to participate online, right? So if Shannon tells you, hey, these are the conditions. Yes, you're approved to work from. Yes, you're approved to. You need to be home because you're in quarantine or whatever, or somebody else has been exposed. Do that. I do need you to forward that email though to me if you get something from Shannon like that, so that I have that documentation as well. Sometimes I don't get that documentation directly from Shannon, so I do need a copy of that. Yeah, and so yeah, or if because you're at your job and somebody was exposed, whether it be a customer or another coworker, yeah, same thing. If you get an order from the county, obviously that you might have been exposed, you're going to stay home. Just send that documentation to me, and we'll make arrangements. Yeah. So if you're quarantined for whatever reason, you can still submit your work online. We'll use that as a way to mark you present. And the way that you're going to submit your work online, either through Inside Ranken or through GitHub. Right. So if there's a quiz to complete that day, you can submit that, and that be your attendance, or you can submit meaningful code on GitHub. Yeah, and as we mentioned here, if you do exceed the number of allowable absences, that 4, but it's for medical reasons, we'll do the appeal form. You're not going to be dismissed for medical reasons. Yeah, and you're going to have opportunities to make up missed work for if you have a day that you can't be here. We'll make arrangements as it should be. Generally, that means if you're not here for a test day for some reason, whether for health or other reasons, then we can make arrangements for you to have the test early, sometimes late, but usually I'm going to arrange it earlier, a day or two earlier. Also, I want to note in here, I still want you to actively participate on a daily basis in GitHub, right? So again, we've got a 6-hour session. If we're doing the lectures outside of class, there's no reason that you shouldn't be able to submit at least 100 lines of code a day, right? Does that make sense? So I expect you to do some regular submissions to GitHub. Part of that also is that helps me track your progress. So if you're submitting your code every day, and whether it's done or not, I'd ask you really submit it daily, whether or not you consider it done. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about me grading an older version of your test. If that happens, I will just update the grade and regrade it on the new stuff. So that gives me a way to see that you're actually moving, or seeing where, what are the places where maybe you're struggling, right? So it's really important for me that you're submitting at least once a day for me to be able to see what you're doing. Cool? Also, I find any students who's is not doing that, right? If you're not able to submit code daily, your chance of passing are slim to none. Because we are going to move fast enough that if you're not doing that every day, you're going to fall behind, and you'll fall behind very quickly. So that's one of the things that I'm asking for there still. In terms of academic honesty, obviously we don't want cheating. Obviously we don't want plagiarism. This is actually always an issue, though, in our industry, right? So unfortunately, as it stands, there's a lot of ways for you to get code, right? But your learning and the stuff that you get out of this really depends on you writing the code yourself, right? And so even the tiniest amount of plagiarism or hints of plagiarism is a big deal, right? Even if you only got 1 or 2 lines of code from the internet or from one of your classmates, that's a big deal. Because oftentimes that 1 or 2 lines of code is maybe the most important part of the program, may have been the hardest part of the program that I wanted you to do. That especially comes in if we talk about something called regular expressions. Regular expressions are hard to write, but they're usually one line of code. But I need you, if I ask you to write a regular expression, I need you to write the regular expression yourself, not find it on Stack Overflow, because you won't get any learning out of copying somebody else's code. So that's a big deal. The other side of things is sometimes when plagiarism happens, our only way to detect that is sometimes in a very small number of lines of code. So that's why I'm going to treat even small, seemingly small transactions as that's the proof I have, right? So those are kind of things to keep in mind. So I'm asking you to write all of the code. All of the code should be your own creation. Okay. I do tend to give example programs and things like that. Examples, and those are there. Those are available for you to use. Sometimes the answer will be very similar to what I've given you, but the big thing that I would say that the biggest thing where people get into issues is when you're copying another student's code, right? That is something that's just not okay. Cool. So, obviously there's gonna be some amount of working together and kind of helping each other and debugging and things like that. But even after all that happens, your code, your code and your fellow students' code shouldn't look alike. Even if you guys are helping each other, you should still have different implementations, different ways of going about it, because you guys are individuals, right? So you have different preferences, different coding styles. Those are really kind of things. Again, I've mentioned Stack Overflow. That's a place to look. Don't copy paste anything from Stack Overflow, please, because you're not going to learn anything. All the stuff you need to learn if you're copying stuff from Stack Overflow, especially in this semester. Everything we cover, you need to understand well, because all of the things we cover this semester are going to be a necessary thing for third semester. I'm not planning to cover anything that you're not going to need next semester. Does that make sense? So if we're covering it, it's something you need to understand, and not just understand, but understand well. And so if you're copy pasting code, you're not going to know those important fundamentals. Okay. So that's where that comes in. If we do see that, that's going to go to a 0 on the assignment. Regardless of how many problems or programs that was, the whole assignment gets a 0 in that case. That's on the first occurrence. The second occurrence of that is we drop you from the class. Okay, so we're really pretty serious about that. Cool. And there's a lot of reasons why we're serious about that. Part of it is because it really, really hurts yourself, but it also really hurts our ability to stand behind you at the end and say, yes, they were a good student, when I don't know if the code was theirs, right? It's very hard for me to give you a recommendation, say this is, I know the student did a great work, if I don't know that you write the code yourself, right? So those are the kind of things there. I do take late work. I do have some opportunities for that. I will take late work up to a week late. That's the cap, right? Up to a week late, I will take assignments. Specifically, labs is the place where this applies. However, I do take 10% off for every day it's late. Okay, so that means that if for whatever reason you missed the deadline on the lab by a day, you're going to lose 10% on it, but you still get 90% of the credit. Okay, so I do have, and I'll give you guys some flexibility on there to turn it late every once in a while. Because that happens, life comes up, sometimes things happen and you can't turn it in on the day it's due. Totally understandable. But I don't want people coming back to me 2-3 weeks later, turning in an old assignment, because at that point you've fallen way behind, right? 2 weeks later, that work basically doesn't mean anything because we're over here. So I have to put a cap on that to say I can't take it past a certain point. Otherwise, you're just going to fall too far behind, or you're going to be working on things that don't really apply to where we're at. So, other things to note on there, obviously we're going to be using GitHub and Git for submitting code. Remember that you have to do two things in order for me to actually get it. What are those two things in terms of uploading your code? What's step 1 and step 2? Commit and push, right? So if you commit it, right? Okay, so you saved a version of it locally on your computer. If you haven't pushed it as well, it's not up on the internet. I can't pull it down. I need you to do both of those steps. So if you don't both commit and push, I'm still going to mark you late, right? If I can't pull it down, and grade it on the day it's due, it's late, right? So those are things to keep in mind. Make sure it actually gets pushed, because that's the thing I see students sometimes miss, and then I find out later that it's not there. The hands-on tests, however, do need to be submitted on the day that they occur. Those I won't take late, because of, hey, if I'm taking them late, then I don't know if you got it, if you wrote it yourself, or I got it, or you got it from somebody else. So those need to be on the due date. Okay. Again, make sure that your code is committed and pushed before you leave. Right. Don't leave the room unless you've checked that is the case. And so how can you check that your code is up there? Well, go to the GitHub website. If you see the files there and you can see the contents of them and they look right, then I will be able to push them. I would strongly suggest don't trust the tools that are on your computer, especially the green checkboxes that Tortoise Git provides. Green or red checkboxes, they usually are wrong, and they really don't. If at best they tell you that it's been committed, not that it's been pushed. So check GitHub when you're done with the test. Make sure all of your code is actually there. Okay. Before you leave. I really would strongly suggest that you make a habit of committing your work multiple times a day, especially with the 6-hour session. I would really expect you to submit 3 times a day, easily. Submitting every 2 hours, great. Sometimes I commit my code honestly every 15-30 minutes when I'm working on my own projects. Basically, I do it every time I'm like, okay, I'm at a happy point. This is good. I made a little bit of forward progress. Sometimes it's only like 3 to 5 lines of code. That's okay. Sometimes that's meaningful progress. Go ahead and throw it up there. Because one of the things that lets you do is once you've committed it, once you push it out there, you can always go back to that, right? So it gives you that rewind button. Or if your computer for whatever reason were to fail, right? If the hard drive goes bad, then you still have a version of it that you can go back in time to. So having that, having the ability to try some things and then hit the undo button is really helpful, but it's really only helpful if you're committing frequently, right? So if you're only committing once a day or once every 2 days, you have a really hard time figuring out what you just broke, right? If I commit every hour and something stops working, well, then I know that it's probably in this change of set of changes that I've made in that past hour, right? So I can look at that, or I can go back an hour and see, all of these versions before, did that bug exist there? And that can really help me narrow down and figure out where that bug was introduced. So frequent code commits are a huge thing in terms of being able to debug your code. It's also really helpful when you get into things in the industry, something called a code review, where you have your other coworkers look at your code, check it off, make sure it's good. It's good to keep those small. And so that in order to keep those small, you have to make small commits. If you're making I worked on this for a week. Here's the giant set of changes that I made, right? I've changed 20 files and there's 1,000 lines of code here. Well, how long is that going to take to review? Probably 2 weeks, right? But if you have like a 5-line change of code, right? I'm only changing 5 lines. How long do you think that's going to take your coworker to review? Huh?
Won't be more like 5 minutes, right?
Probably more than 5 minutes, but somewhere around there to review 5 lines of code, right? Versus big changes are much harder. So it's good to get in a habit of making small changes. So overall grading, we'll have the quizzes, and those will be over the readings and the videos. And so sort of 10% of your grade. There's also the lab assignments that we'll get on a regular basis. Those are 10% of your grade as well. The written tests are 30%, and those will have for each major unit. So like your first written test will be out over the first 3 chapters of the textbook. The next one will be over chapters 4 through 6, etc. And then same thing with hands-on tests. We'll do the hands-on tests and the written tests on the same day. And so I think if I look at the calendar and pull this over, your first tests land on the 24th. So on the 24th, you'll have a written test and a hands-on test over the stuff we're going to cover this next week. So those will be roughly every week or 2 weeks that we'll have tests. Also at the end of the semester, there are 2 assignments that you'll need to do. One of them is your portfolio. You'll be making a portfolio website for yourself. You can look at my portfolio that I shared in the previous slides to kind of get an example of what that might look like. What I ask that to be is just a single page. You want to figure out how to fit it all onto one page. And we can kind of talk about how to do some of that stuff. Bootstrap's a big deal in making that work and making it responsive and making it look nice. But that's one thing that you'll need to do. Again, because it's one page it will be a pretty small assignment, relatively speaking. But that's one thing I want you to make and get it published online. And you can walk through how to get that published at that point. And the other thing is a client site. And this is actually something that you need to get started as soon as possible because it does take some time to get it through the pipeline. So one of the things you'll need to do at the end of the semester is make a website for somebody else. Now, I'm giving you the freedom to pick who that somebody else is. So whether that's a friend, whether that's a coworker, whether that's a family member, it can be anybody, but it's going to be that you're making the website for somebody else. And so you need to get the requirements and the needs from them and figure out if that's going to be a good fit. I will say that I do need you to run that by me before you say, yes, we're going to do this, and give them a yes or no, because a lot of things are not covered till next semester, right? So you're not going to be able to make anything with the database given the skills that you have this semester, right? So that means anything that requires a database is not going to be a good thing for a client site this semester. It could be something you could try and do next semester, but not this semester. So that's one of the things that I need you to talk to me and find about that first, because you may have to talk to 2, 3, 5 different people so you can find a project that's going to be a good fit. So you want to get that started sooner than later so we can kind of get that worked out. So you'll be banking something from them. I'll have a rubric on that as far as skills I want you to apply and things like that. Your client will also be grading you as well. Now, that client arrangement, it can be in a paid arrangement or it can be on a free basis. You can do it whichever way you can choose. I would say that your best bet, though, is if you can find a paying projects to build somebody who is willing to pay you some money for it, that is better because you will learn more from it and you're more likely to put more work into it. So even if they're just going to pay you $100 to make them a website, that is better. That is a better opportunity to choose than the no pay, because now that person has some stake in it, right? If they're just getting it for free, honestly, you're not going to get a lot of great feedback on whether they like it or not. They'll just be like, meh, it's great. I got it for free. No big deal. But if you're charging them $100, then they're going to say, oh, I hate this. They're much more likely to give you some honest feedback if they're willing to pay you some money for it. Does that make sense? So, you can do it either way, but that's what I would say is you're going to learn more from it if it's somebody who's willing to pay you $100, $20, whatever it is. It doesn't matter how small or large that number is. If it's bigger than zero, that's an improvement, right? So those are the kind of things there. Letter grades are the same as they've always been, and you can look in there up there as you're interested to them. As we've kind of mentioned, our classes are 6 hours in person per day, so that's kind of the expectation. And there'll be some expectation for you to do work outside of class still, right? So whether that means reading, whether that means watching videos, whether that means continuing to work on the labs or preparing for the test, I would still expect you, we're meeting 6 hours a day, I would still expect you to be spending at least 2 hours a day out of class every day, easily, to make sure that you have all the things down, right? So you should budget for that. You should budget for doing some work outside of class. There is oftentimes tutoring available. Our tutor just graduated, so I don't know who our current tutor is. We may be recruiting somebody from last semester, I don't know. So I don't know what the status of that. If you do need a tutor though, we can try and get you in touch. So let me know, and let me or Evan know, and we'll try to figure something out there. Because we always have to hire new tutors every year. So we'll be hiring a new tutor pretty soon, if there's a demand for it. If you have any disabilities, talk to the SCC if you need any sort of accommodations there. We will kind of work together and figure those things out. And career services as well is available as well. We do have a job site that's worth it. It's well worth it for you to check that and actually put some filters that send you emails every day about like, hey, is there a new job that needs HTML? I would absolutely recommend you set up things like that. I've got that set up on our jobs website. Sometimes I share those website. Sometimes I share those jobs if I see something come through that's like, oh, this might be relevant. So sometimes you'll see me posting things there. But definitely keep an eye on job opportunities that are out there. And snow days, we don't, we're probably not going to have snow at this point in time, so that won't be a big deal. The big thing to know is that our policy is unless you get an email, a text that says we're not having classes, we're having classes. Regardless of what it says on the news, regardless if there's a bunch of school cancellations, unless we specifically say that it's canceled, it's not canceled. Cool. So if you should be on the Omni alert system. If you get a text message from them that says no classes today for whatever reason, that's the source of truth. If you don't get that text message, you don't get that email, we're going to be here, and you'll be counted absent if you're not here. Okay. Any questions there, syllabus wise?
Are we like automatically in that Omni messaging system?
No, you do have to sign up for it, and there's a link to inside Ranken to do it. Also worth noting, you have to re-enroll in it every year, right? So even if you have enrolled in it for the spring, you're going to need to renew that login and renew that notification. So that's how we send out important safety things, including, this doesn't happen often, but if there's dangerous threats outside of the campus because this is not a great neighborhood. You do want to be able to get those messages. So, COVID-19 safety guidelines, all of that stuff still in effect. So you should have learned about all of that stuff already, but just to reiterate, all that stuff still applies. So what does that mean? 6 feet of distance everywhere on campus, that's still a requirement. Inside, outside, doesn't matter. 6 feet of distance is the bare minimum. And that's with masks, even with masks on, right? The bare minimum, if you don't have a mask on, is like 15 feet, right? So that's with the assumption that the masks are slowing things down. Again, masks are required anytime on campus, inside or outside. As soon as you come in the gate, you need to have a mask on, don't take it off. Cool. The one exception to that is if you're eating. If you're eating or drinking, you can take the mask off briefly. To do that, you need to immediately put it back on. And that's it. Your masks, you do need to get them so they fit well. They should not be falling off your face. So make sure that you fix that. I see yours is a bit loose, and I see yours is a bit loose, David, as well. I think in your case, I think all you need to do is just tie the straps a little bit tighter, and you may be able to do that as well. You might see on my back end, I've just got a strip of fabric with 2 buttons. I've been using that for the past year. That's been really, really helpful. Does a great job at keeping it tight. Also keeps it off my ears. So, if you can get a hold of one of those, I would strongly recommend doing that because that will fix a lot of the loose masks issues. There. It's just a matter of getting that piece of fabric the right length, but it's a pretty easy thing to do. So masks are in place, 6 feet of distance. The cafeteria is currently closed. I just got I just saw the email. They just sent that out last week. I think it was like Thursday or Friday. But so the cafeteria is currently closed. What that means is we'll give you an hour to go do lunch because hopefully you've brought your lunch. If you haven't, you can go out and go visit a fast food joint or wherever and get something and bring it back. But that's kind of the current situation. I think the cafeteria is supposed to reopen on June 2nd, which is about three weeks from now. So that's kind of things to keep in mind. Anything else that I forgot? You remember as far as those things go? Remember that you should have an armband when you came in from the temperature checks, and yeah. So make sure you get that in there. If for whatever reason you come in and you have a fever, you have a higher temperature, they turn you away, or even if it's just, I think the limit is 100 degrees, which is still pretty high. So, I mean, if you're running a fever of any sort, whether they turn you away or not, let me know. Again, just go home and we'll figure out, how to do the makeup work. It's better if you've got a fever. It's much better for you to be home and resting. Whether that's the flu, whether that's a cold, whether that's COVID, whatever it is, it's better for you to just take that day off because that will mean that you recover faster and you end up missing less days of work rather than trying to push yourself that day or less days of class. Cool. That's what I've got in terms of rules and regulations, policies and procedures. So let's talk about what your homework and what some of your assignments are today, and then we'll send you on break because you're definitely due for one. So things that I need you to do today, you're going to clone the coursework repo. The link for this is on inside Ranken, and that's going to be toward just doing that first step is going to be towards your attendance today. Right, that's enough because it's going to trigger the repo to get created, and it's going to trigger a commit to that repo. That will count towards your attendance for today. So I need you to do that, and that also helps me get some tracking set up. I've got an application that I started building and to help me track your progress through GitHub and such. And so you'll be getting emails from me. Actually, you'll get an automated email from me every time you submit code now. Once I've got the repo set up. So you'll see those come to your inside Ranken, and we can kind of look at that. Because again, you should get one of those by tomorrow. It's probably when you'll get the first one of those. Next up, there's a setup instructions that are inside Ranken. You'll need to go through all of that. That will make sure you have all your software set up, especially GitHub set up. Even if you've done that series of things before, go through it again. That makes sure that your software is up to date, and also make sure that you haven't missed some of those important steps. I think that if I remember right, there's a few things that I've added in terms of Git that I don't think that Mr. G has on his steps. So there's a few things I want to ask you to do to make sure that you have your account set up. So do that. So that's going to help you get all the software you need installed. It's also going to show you how the configuration settings that you need to change in VS Code. There's also a bunch of extensions in VS Code that we're going to add. And so those setup instructions include all of the extensions, all the plugins that we're going to use. From there, there's a video on the playlist. The first one in the list is Learn Development, Web Development as an Absolute Beginner. You're going to watch through that, and they're going to watch through the Chapter 1 lectures. Okay? So start with those, read the chapter, take the quiz. That's your assignment. Those are your assignments for today. Cool? So that means we're not going to write any code today. We'll start writing code tomorrow. But that's why we need to get you through all that stuff, making sure your software is installed and those kind of things so that we can write code tomorrow. Cool? Questions? So that's your stuff for today. So let's go ahead and take a break, and we'll call it a 15-minute break. We'll come back at 10:15, and I'll give you any assistance that you need with cloning the repo.